Monica Michelle, and I want to talk about Emily Mendenhall. I've been so excited for this interview. A little intimidated, to be fair. She is brilliant. She is a medical anthropologist, and she's here to talk to me about the book she wrote, Invisible Illness, A History of Hysteria to Long COVID. I hope you will join me in welcoming her. I'm hoping we can get her back on the show a few times. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy. Hey everyone, welcome back to Invisible Not Broken. I am so excited. I get to interview Emily Mendenhall, and has the coolest job title I've ever heard in my life, medical anthropologist. When I saw that, there's no way I wasn't doing this interview. I usually will not take anyone from an agency, but medical anthropologist, I had to say yes. Like, there was just no option. And to discuss the newest book, which is Invisible Illness, A Journey of Hysteria to Long COVID. And you work at Georgetown. I have so many questions for you, from what is a medical anthropologist to, was the use of the word hysteria purposeful in that title? So we can start with whichever one you would like to start with.
Sure. I'll start with the bread and butter. What is an anthropologist? So a medical anthropologist, obviously anthropologists study humans and we do all sorts of things. It's a big term. We're the study of humanity and the experience of humans in the world. A medical anthropologist specifically study health, culture, and politics and how they all kind of interplay. Some people may focus more on the experience of health of, for example, farm laborers or people experiencing climate change, mental health, physical health, and others may do more clinical, focused on systems of medicine, from biomedicine to Chinese medicine. So we do different things, but really thinking of the intersection of health, culture, and politics is kind of what we do. Do you want me to talk about the time?
Let's just go right into that, because the word hysteria, I swear, every time I see that word, I'm like, and it makes me very interested. So I'm wondering if that was really purposeful, because, you know, as people with ovaries, I think you and I are both like, at least present as someone who owns ovaries. That word gets thrown at us so hard and so fast and so brutally. And it's usually the way to keep us very quiet about something they don't want to talk about.
Yeah. So, as a feminist, actually putting that term out there and talking about how people have been harmed by these terms for so long is part of the story. So chapter 1 is a history of hysteria and how the construct of hysteria through centuries has been used to harm women and dismiss women. And that's why it's a history. So even today, long COVID, chronic Lyme, so many different conditions have been used to dismiss and ignore and belittle women in clinical settings. So, talking about the long history of these actions, because I started interviewing long COVID patients. I did over 150 interviews and I experienced definitely some symptoms myself, given the severity of people who are bedridden or whose lives are so extraordinarily transformed. I don't identify as having long COVID, but I definitely had symptoms of really intense anxiety and fatigue for a long time, and it took me 2 months to get over the flu this winter. I mean, your body changes, especially when you have this kind of incident. But given the kind of extraordinary experience that some people have had, really thinking about what long COVID is something that is not just of this time. And as I started doing more interviews and actually just doing this deep reading of my colleagues and so much memoir and biography and actually historical analyses and ethnography, I was just struck by the depth of history that we have. And so I started listening to people's interviews and saying, none of this is new. Long COVID is not a new experience. It might be a new virus, but really what it is a watershed moment to talk about how women have experienced, American medicine in particular, Western medicine, and how for so long women have been dismissed and belittled, and what this means in this current moment. So I talk about embodied health movements and how those have radically changed how we think about complex chronic illness. And it's really a disability justice book too. Like, how do we think about, complex chronic illnesses as a form of disability? Because it is so disabling, but it really disability itself is also something that requires recognition from the state and support from the state, not only in medicine, but, also in money. So thinking about how we support people in these deep ways, and also how we believe people and take seriously their conditions that do not match in American medicine. Many people who, and I know you can attest, and so many of the people you've interviewed talk about the multiple layers of and systems level change that happens when you have a complex chronic condition. And the invisibility part is not only about how people are made invisible, but it's really about the unverifiability of illness and how, if we think about MS used to be aligned in hysteria, but once you could look at the plaques in the brain, MS was transformed. And this is a social medical process, not actually a biological one. It's just that it was seen and diagnosed in a new way. So that's kind of why I used hysteria. It was quite thoughtful that I used it. And I just like, let's put it out there right now. Let's just like, how women have been belittled forever. I just decided to put it in the title because it's the heart of the book.
I'm so glad you did. I think it catches the attention, but it feels so almost like Shakespearean in the way of using language in such a multi-level way that the word really does take on so much more life and the different lenses. One of the lenses I think we can't ignore, especially when we're talking about health and especially people who own ovaries, is that the hysteria, and I'm afraid people don't know this history, which is that it wasn't just we were ignored and belittled, we were
Mm-hmm.
institutionalized. We
Yeah.
were electric shock therapy. We had our
Yeah.
brains like split open. And there seems to be this thing in like medicine where if we're going to be talking about masculine bodies, then it's can it work? Can it go and do the labor? No, then we better get that patched up immediately and get that man back out there. And if
Absolutely.
it's women, I've noticed as I've gotten closer to menopause, it's like, yeah, that's whatever. You're not having any more babies anyway. It's fine. I was like, no, it's
Yeah.
not fine. I'm going insane and this is crazy and it hurts. Can you please help fix it? It's like, yeah, but your kids are raised. You're done. Like, and it's such a weird thing on like how my father was treated when he was chronically ill, my husband when he's sick. It's a very different experience, especially when we're looking at
Absolutely.
pain medication or
Yeah.
what things are offered. Where like I think there's in TikTok a woman just went in for her dental surgery and her husband had the same one, and they gave
Hmm.
him Percocet and they gave her a Tylenol.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I
That
mean, and
stuff.
it's 10 times worse for women of color, right? Like
So much worse.
it's gendered, it's class-based, it's racialized. I mean, the oppression and like there's ableism, there's sexism, there's racism all in the medical system. And, it's just amplified when you're experiencing multiple intersectional identities. But I think Maxim, if we kind of dig into that a bit deeper, it's, how little research is actually done on women and how we use these certain codes. And we're like, oh,
Do you
all
think
these
people
women
know
are,
that? I just want to stop
they
ever
do
just a
not.
second. Tell everyone how many of these things, like we don't even test period products on blood. They tested it on
Right.
saline. Like
Yes.
all of our
We
procedures were tested on men. We don't
like
even
we
know
think
what the
I mean,
body
we are so
does.
progressive in some ways that are harmful, and then in other ways it's just, we know I actually really love like Jen Gunther's book on menopause, the Menopause
Mm,
Manifesto. Like people are really talking about menopause in a way that I haven't seen, that hasn't really
right.
been done. So I think things are becoming visible, but at the same time the Trump administration is taking money away from like studies on women in particular that have been studying women's health for decades. And so, like, what is the removal or the withdrawal or decimation of these funding structures going to do? It's going to dismiss that longitudinal data and understanding that we do have, that we desperately need. And one of the things that I think I really just got kind of moved by in this research was thinking about our neuroimmuno kind of neuroimmunological kind of systems and lives, and how deeply
Mm,
intertwined our immune systems and our digestive systems and our neurological systems are, and how difficult it is to see and measure illnesses that disrupt these multiple systems that become so entwined, because like dysautonomia is like this very, very common system or experience condition that so many people who have these common chronic conditions experience. So it's at that embodied intersection that, dysautonomia appears and brings people together. That was kind of a conjoining, kind of unifying symptom and experience, the autonomic nervous system. But we don't do a lot of, we don't have enough understanding of how that's dysregulated, and maybe how viruses or bacteria, or even, I mean, we have more work on autoimmune conditions, but so many people have these overlapping conditions. So I think it was really interesting to see that people with the same primary diagnosis may have an experience that's very much more similar to someone else with a different primary diagnosis, but they have the same clustering of conditions. So just the fact that medicine doesn't deal with complexity. I've been studying for 2 decades the fact that, I have wrote this book Rethinking Diabetes. I've done work on diabetes around the world and look at intersections between trauma and diabetes. And one of the things I always say is like I've never met anyone who has like one thing, like people who have diabetes have multiple, intercepting conditions. They may have depression, they may have hypertension, but they also may have a lot of stress from their daughter who got kicked out of school and has not having a hard time, or they may have an abusive partner, or they may just not have someone they can depend on when they go broke and can't pay the bills. Those stressors are, I've argued, conditions that are deeply entwined with chronic illness. And so really understanding that complexity is, in my view, everything.
It's so interesting because it's hard to quantify things. And also, how people handle stress is such a different thing from people to people, culture to culture.
Mm-hmm.
And also with the expectation of, like, I don't know about you, but I know that, like, when I was coming up as a young mother, and even when I was in school, it was this be a duck. Everything happens below the water, and you better look like you've got it.
Mm.
Calm, it's all easy for me. I've got this. While you were paddling with everything you have, like, under the surface. And the hiding, the not perfect, ended up being so much more of a stressor than even the stuff that was going on. And I'm just wondering, do you see a difference in how that stress can exist like across cultures? Is there cultures where you feel like people are more supported, where they
Uh,
might be under those same stressors, but it's not showing as much? I'm just curious, like, how that
yeah,
goes between different kinds of people.
I'm going to kind of talk about three things.
Okay.
The first thing is that, no, that I'm going to talk about that later. The cultural piece is very important. But I have to say that there's two elements that I really dig into the book that respond to your question. Number one, thinking about neurasthenia, which was a term that kind of replaced hysteria and was kind of applied to men. And it kind of preceded shell shock and how kind of multi-systems health conditions, chronic health conditions that had a psychological component were perceived and interpreted. And when it was first written about, they talked about neurasthenia as a certain American type of stress where, with the ignition of the light bulb, the ignition of the railroads and industry, we have to think about our bodies similarly as something that is fruitful and powerful and like you don't want to dim a light in. But really thinking about what happens when you dim and you become weak, and how we have to kind of overcome this. This whole construction of the multiple layers of expectation in our culture is what's making people weak, which is what is making people sick. So even like 200 years ago, people were writing on this American way of stress. And so one of the things I argue in the book when I have this like wonderful student, so one of the ways I got really interested in long COVID is I actually, during COVID, in the first year of COVID, I went home to rural Iowa where my family is. And I ended up being like, oh my goodness, after being in Washington where everyone was masking and my friends were like working on like global health security agenda and everyone's taking it very seriously at the international level. Then going back to my small hometown in rural Iowa where my brother-in-law was leading the public health effort and like no one was masking and everyone was like, it's a hoax. And, like the complete 180, I was like, what the heck is happening? So I did this big research study. I just basically interviewed everyone I grew up with. And I was like, what is happening? Because we got there in the middle of an outbreak and I wanted to help. It was great because my kids were just hanging out with their cousins. And we had a great time in quarantine with the family. But at the same time, it just kind of created this deep understanding of kind of a culture of disbelief and almost a kind of white denialism that has
Mm.
peripheраted the United States. And, I work a lot in sub-Saharan Africa. And a lot of my friends there were like, what is happening? What's happening in America? And so I was able to kind of write this book to communicate that. And actually, it's really interesting because it's called Unmasked, a history, or not history, Unmasked culture community in the case of Okoboji. Okoboji is the name of my hometown. And it's just been really interesting because the Asian market for that book is like explode. It's like very big. And I think it's because people in China, in Japan, in Korea, in East Asia, have a very different perception, such a radically different cultural understanding of how you respond to a viral threat just because of so many different reasons. And so it's really interesting to think about that, but also think about how in like East Asian or Chinese medicine, for example, or Ayurvedic medicine from India, how so many systems of medicine are deeply systemic. And there's like different levels of understanding health. Like in Chinese medicine, there's this like notion of sub-health or like thinking about unhealth as not necessarily a diagnosis, but of a form of feeling unwell. So it's not an illness, but you have this fatigability, right? As being a category of wellness. It's not that you're sick, but you're unwell. And we don't have that category in Western medicine, right? And in Western medicine, you have this or you have this or you have this. And if you have this complex kind of multi-system struggle that isn't diagnosable, you're kind of dismissed. And so it's part of the culture of medicine itself that dismisses people living with these conditions.
So what are some of the things that you noticed? Because you interviewed people all like from your hometown. You got to see what were you how do I phrase this correctly? Oh, fuck it. What were the things you were seeing as a thorough thread through the people you grew up with that raised you that could maybe like help some of us? Like, I'm on the West Coast, I'm in a very educated area.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to put down anyone in other places. It's just that this is kind of a college area. People really like the masking was almost immediate and pretty
Mm-hmm.
universal here.
Yeah.
So I'm
Well,
just curious what you saw as the through because these are not like it's not because I grew up in California I'm smart and it's not because someone grew up in like the Midwest that they are that's not true, but
yeah.
it's just like what are you seeing as the through lines here?
Well, what I wrote about in Unmasked was really thinking about kind of the culture of community. And so in Unmasked, kind of like at the time when Trump was in his first term, he was like saying, look, we need to protect each other by protecting the economy. And I think that
Sorry.
framework, I mean, it's true. That's what he said, like literally
No,
said
I
that.
I believe that. Actually,
And
it,
that
it feels almost mitigated to the things that he says.
But you were probably reading and listening to stuff that was really about public health and protecting the community by masking and quarantining and preventing the virus from spreading. And I think those meta narratives were so divergent in social media. And I would say that people did protect the community by protecting the economy in this small tourist town. It's a tourist town. So
Hmm.
there was like the 100 days of summer. So people were, they're basically like, if you're sick, stay home. If you're vulnerable, stay home. Don't, but I want to live my life, but unfortunately, on so many occasions, someone said, well, I want to live my life. They got sick, then they brought it home to grandma and grandma died, or dad died, or someone they beloved. And then it's too late. And obviously, that was the whole strategy for quarantine. But the kind of the complexities and miscommunications about what it means to be all in it together were so deeply divergent. And I mean, this is a problem with not having unified, with having such disparate communication channels. And that's my view. And I mean, there's so much gray areas that I talk about in Unmasked. But at the same time, as I was finishing Unmasked, I had a student who got really, really sick from long COVID. Ken Kaplan, he's now a medical student at Columbia, is doing really well. But for about 18 months, he was just incredibly sick. And he was going to drop out of school. And I was his honors thesis mentor. And I was like, you know what? Why don't you, I'm an anthropologist. So I'm like, why don't you do an autoethnography? Just start journaling. All I want you to do is journal. Like, don't throw out the thesis yet, because he's just so thoughtful, a thoughtful student. So I was like, okay, just start journaling everything. So he just started journaling his feelings throughout the day, all of his emergency medical visits. We wrote a piece together in Scientific American a couple years ago, because what was so interesting is that, like, we were talking about brain fog, and it was like going all around, and his brain fog was so different, right? It was like he could remember things in 10-minute intervals. And so and then he couldn't remember deep things or keep up with conversations. So he wouldn't want to be around in like big groups with his friends, because he felt very stressed out by that. And like what his brain fog meant, or how his experience, like a lot of people have had psychotic episodes or hallucinations from long COVID, for example. And that's very different than his. And then other people just have like word recall. Like that definitely happened to me. Like, just, it's kind of like after you have a kid, and then like the next year you're like so sleep deprived that your body is not functioning normally. And I think also when you have chronic illness and your sleep is affected, right? You have that cognitive difficulty staying on top of it. And it felt like I had a lot of that, but like his like actual memory and consistency was really hard. And he was able to kind of work through it, and probably shouldn't have, probably shouldn't
Mm.
take a leave. But one of the culture of work and overwork of America and of American academia is one of the reasons why he stayed on, right? He didn't want to be perceived as weak. He didn't want to be perceived as a quitter. And half of his professors didn't believe him that he was sick. He had to fight for ADA accommodations. He had to like do all this stuff. So that really made me very interested in thinking about long COVID. And then he did a study. Well, we did a study. He did the interviews with patients and policymakers and scientists, really, who were in his orbits. And it was so interesting. And so I wanted to dig into it a little bit more and take more of a feminist perspective. So then I did these 150 interviews, but we'd already done like 60 on top of that. That was really interesting, just to kind of learn kind of about the more diversity of perspectives from different people coming at it from different perspectives, and at that time I was also following like all of the spin-offs of the long COVID groups from like Body Politic and Patient-Led Research Collaborative and kind of all those really exciting groups. So that's kind of the long answer. And then just like a piggyback, because you asked about how different cultures experience things. There's this incredible book, if you're interested in how people experience trauma across cultures. There's this beautiful book by my wonderful friend who's a professor at Naropa University and does this really cool psychedelics work. She wrote a book called Spacious Minds. And it's one of my favorite books because my husband and I actually, after living in Delhi for a year, spent a month up in McLeod-Ganj near where the Dalai Lama resides, where she was doing this work. So I also feel very close to it. But she interviewed nuns and monks, Tibetan refugees, who had experienced extraordinary trauma from torture to expulsion, loss of land and sensibility of their way of life, but also quite a bit of violence. And why could people experience so much violence and trauma and not have PTSD? Like, what does PTSD mean? And one of the arguments is a cultural way of thinking. So many Tibetan Buddhists have a different perception of karma and compassion, right? So when you think about meditation and mindfulness, you think of letting go, right? You think of really putting compassion at the center. So when Sarah Lewis was interviewing this nun, she was like, well, how do you think about this traumatic experience? And this is something that really stuck with me, and it's in her book Spacious Minds. But I was just so struck by the fact that the woman was like, well, when this guy was torturing me in a poly prison, I was thinking about how this act of violence would live on in his memory and in his life so much longer than my physical ephemeral experience. And that takes a really different way of thinking and training to be able to, even in that moment, think about such violence in a different way, right? Or think about such extraordinary suffering and pain in an individual level in this meta kind of disembodied dimension. And that is a way that culture and the way that you think and the way that you learn about how to interact in your body and with your brain in such a deeply different way can be transformative. And so I feel like there's so much to learn there and to learn from, especially with mindfulness. I mean, in America we could use a little bit more compassion in general, but I think that's a radical example of how different things can be.
You just blew the top of my head off. So I'm going to try to form a coherent thought and we'll see if I can get there. Is there an aspect of the United States where I feel like we're such a new country and we're such a new sort of psychology here that it almost feels like we're all like all of us are at like a 6-year-old level in my mind, where we are all like the kid. And if you have not gone to therapy yet, I'm sorry, I'm going to hurt you right now, but I will hold your hand. And if we like a 6-year-old sees their parents get divorced and like, what did I do? How did I screw this up? And I feel like that's a place of fear and terror because the world's scary. And we're going, if I caused it, I have some control here. And I wonder if a lot of like what the United States goes through is that we're still 6 in our brains and we're going, I must have done something to cause this. So I can feel like I have some level of control. And this was a woman who very much seemed to understand the worst possible circumstances she did not have control. And that what was happening to her was not something she did or had a fault in, and she was able to go outside of that. I'm just wondering, like, with that very convoluted metaphor, if that can also be vellum on top of what we're talking about how we deal with health and things like long COVID, which we don't have that instant visual this person is sick. And now we have like all of the gaslighting that's telling us we're not sick. We're not as unusable as we think we are. If we just bootstrapped it, we could power through. And I'm just wondering if there's like something in that. I'm just wondering if there's something to that idea that we are still stuck in this idea that we have control, god damn it, even if it's very fake control.
I think that's a fallacy of medicine because medicine, I feel like most of us who experience, I'm in perimenopause, I've experienced different things. I have an anxiety disorder, like how you have control over certain parts of your life. In medicine, we kind of think that, and as physicians are trained, we think about, and maybe not family docs, definitely not nurse practitioners, but in general, when you go through medicine, you're trained to think about here's a problem that we can fix. Like this is fixable. That's why you go into the doctor. And most people go to the doctor, especially if you're underinsured, you go to the doctor because you just want some meds that might make you feel a little better.
And it's
And
only one
people,
thing. Your gastroenterologist is only looking at your stomach. Your neurologist is only looking at your brain.
and that is exactly the problem, right? Like you're like patting down all these symptoms, but at the center of it is this complex, deeply rooted dysregulation. And it may be that there is a literal virus hooked onto your nervous system, your vagal nerve that dysregulates it. Like it literally could be that. But like, one of the things that so many people say is like they weren't able to start in any sort of recovery until they were able to just kind of surrender to
Mm,
like this imagination of what health means for them, and what it means to live with this condition, and just be gracious with themselves that things are really different. And you can live, I actually just edited this other book called Savoring Care: Flourishing with Diabetes Across Cultures. And what I love about it is that, and I edited it with Jessica Harden, a bunch of anthropologists wrote with people they'd worked with, like research associates for years, and they kind of wrote together these stories about, it's so easy to talk about how trauma and diabetes, or how living with a health condition can be so bad and cause so much harm. But a lot of people figure out how to live a good life in spite of illness. Like, how do
mm.
you live well and have diagnoses? Manage them and support one another. And at the center is our social ties. And we know there's so much research that says that people who have social support, beloveds, children, partners, neighbors, a safety net, how all of these dimensions, these social ties, are really what keep people well. And we know that isolationism and, not having support, not having someone who can loan you money or take you to the doctor or ensure that you have your feet rubbed when you're feeling bad, which may be your partner, maybe you're, someone to cuddle with you, to make you feel loved and warm. These elements, when they're missing, we're human, we really suffer. But savoring care is really about like how people come together to build strength and to build well-being, which can be in conversation with, but it can be a little bit separate from your illness, and your illness isn't everything. It's not who you are, it's an experience that you're living in your body. But we have so many different parts of who we are.
It's such an important thing. It's such a little puzzle piece. What were some of the lessons that we should have learned during COVID? What are the mistakes we've made that I'm pretty sure we're going to make again? As I'm watching RFK Jr. talk, it's what we're actually calling what he's doing.
Oh my god.
Seriously, the rage and dread. What were some of the things that we really like? What for me, one of the big misses was we actually got so close to a level of parity. Like
Yeah.
disabled people actually were able to go to school. We were able to work. That was
Hmm.
possible, and they took it all away. So for me, that was like one of the big misses in what we didn't learn that we should have.
Yeah.
What are some of the things you're seeing that we did learn that seems to be working forward, even if it's getting stymied now? Or
Yeah.
what should we have learned?
I think you make a really important point of that moment when everyone was remote and when we were all reimagining how we can work together was really important for people living with disabilities, like people, especially mobility issues or, fatigability, like any sort of issue that makes it really hard to go to the office. I do feel that has been transformative and still does exist in some fields. But I also agree with you that some of it has absolutely disappeared, gone away, and it's like people have amnesia or something. But I do feel like it shifted the culture. And I would say that the younger generations have a completely different, are living with that perception and imagination. I mean, the elders, God love them, the elders need to step aside. It is time for a new generation of leadership. And I think that is going to be such a critical change. I'm hoping in the midterms. And I think we are seeing some elder political leaders not run again in great ways.
Goodbye, Nancy Pelosi. It's been lovely. See you. Never. Please go away.
Well, she has been an incredible leader, but it's time to retire. And, I think that, and I was just, someone was just asking me if you could talk to one historical figure, who would you want to speak to and what would you say to them? And, God love RBG, loved her. But like also her decision not to step down when she was quite ill in a time that she could be replaced has undone all of the great work that she's done. And so, really thinking about how we reimagine leadership and also passing the torch Oh
Mm.
my God, that's so important. And I do feel like the younger generation's energy and way they imagine a future is very different than, I'm a Zennial. I'm like Gen X, elder millennial sort of person. So I didn't have a cell phone until after college, like my kids are like, what? How can you imagine? How do you live that way?
Thank
But,
God. There
yeah,
are no videos of me in 17. Thank God.
yeah, same. But, I do feel that there is a different kind of tolerance and way of thinking and loving and communication and connectivity that younger people have that the elders, especially the boomers, just don't have. And so it's like, see you later. How do we reimagine America and, the social contract in a generation that's so much more deeply connected than the one that still hangs to power? And that is like a bit of optimism that I might have, because I mean, at this moment, how can you not be optimistic? But I also, so we were just talking before we jumped on about this new publication I have. So I just launched this new publication called Science Politics. It's kind of like a mix between Scientific American and foreign policy. But we're publishing just tons of pieces by scientists about the politics of science. And so many of my colleagues in anthropology and medicine and biology and space and aeros, whatever people are doing, in environmental science, they have so many viewpoints that are completely crushed and ignored. So science politics is a way to bring these leaders into the center to say, this is actually what we know. I'm a scientist. I've been studying this for 30 years. Let me tell you what I know, rather than having so few venues for these voices to shine. It's so hard to get something in the New York Times. You know what I mean? Like, people don't know how to do that. So this is a way to just get all of these really important scientists' voices out into the public. That is also something I really just became so visible to me, is that that kind of legitimacy is missing, in part because the scientists aren't heard of. People say science can't be political, but it is political. I mean, I'm not going to, like, people aren't presenting nature findings in science politics, but they're talking about how science is political. And it's really important. I mean, we have this great piece just coming out on Greenland and like how, what are, the resources that are being contested, all of there's, I mean, almost everything has some relation.
I'm not sure where I want to go with this because there's like five directions that my brain's like going into an ADD rabid like rat on a wheel right now. Let's try with the politics and how science gets funded because I don't
Yeah.
think that people quite understand this, that when science studies come out, a lot of times it's like, unless it's out of an actual like university, it can be funded by oil companies, it can be funded by sugar research, it can be funded by lobbyists. And it's very hard to get funding for sciences where we can look at some of the ancient cultures and like spaces in the world where they would have entire courts of scientists, of engineers, and they had these marvels that existed in the 11th century because they put the
Mm-hmm.
money into it.
Yeah.
They didn't give sports stars $10 million a year to play glorified fetch. I'm sorry, but like it's glorified fetch
Yeah.
versus like how little you can make as a scientist, how little respect you can get these days. I think that's the other thing I'd also like to ask you about is how do we actually get the respect for scientists where it's hard to get published in the New York Times, but it's very easy to put your common sense opinion on Facebook. And if
Yeah.
you are convincing enough, it's a cult of personality.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, how is science funded? There's lots of ways. I mean, historically, the United States has funded research around the world, not only American researchers, but, the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, the Social Science Research Council. I mean, there's so many different philanthropists of money, but also, government funds. I'm an anthropologist, and they just discontinued the doctoral dissertation grant that funded my research. I worked at Cook County Hospital in Chicago with Mexican immigrant women. I was there for 5 years. The research that they funded was 1 year. It was at the end of my time there. It was like incredible opportunity to really think about how social and health conditions travel together. And we can't actually care for people living with diabetes without really caring for the whole person and what that means. And it was such a privilege to do that work. And I did that work on actually a very small amount of money, like $50,000. It paid for all these I took blood samples, I did the psych evals, and I just spent like 6 hours with 122 people, 121 women. listening to their life stories. And then I did all this other stuff. And I have to say, what a privilege it is to do that. And that was my first book, Syndemic Suffering. But like being able to look at how the psychophysiology of trauma is imprinted in diabetes or other conditions lets us think about care in a very different way. And that work permeates all sorts of things, and transfers to so many disciplines. And that's just one example through my work. But all of that funding is gone. It's been all
Yeah.
reallocated. It's been archived. And the NIH is suffering. I mean, I live in DC. It's a really hard time. A lot of friends, I mean, first of all, I have a lot of friends who've lost their jobs. I mean, it's really hard to see your friends suffering in such ways. And a lot of people are finding new jobs, reimagining what their careers, but the ways in which the firings were held were just so terrible. And my friends who are still in government are just miserable. They really have done a great job of terrorizing the federal workforce. But what that looks like at NIH is really frustrating. And so there's some people, a lot have retired, a lot have left, but like those who have stayed on, who want to try to keep the ship moving, God bless them, because like it's a very toxic environment. But without them, and without having a very at least someone to keep the will alive or something, I don't know what we're going to do. Some grants are being funded, and so many people in my community are reimagining or how they talk about their work, like being very, very careful. I mean, it's
But there's
just really
certain words you can't
horrifying.
use if you put women or marginalized or
Oh, it's
trans
awful.
or non-binary. Like if you put anything in there that is not
Yeah.
white, male, Christian, you get immediately removed from the grant. My friends have lost all their grants. My friends
Yeah.
have no
I
grants
don't
left.
I don't know if there's any listeners here who are in DC, but I went to the Holocaust Museum in November, and they have this whole part about Hitler's silencing campaigns and targeting of disabled people, of Jewish families, all sorts of scientists. It is so eerie to
Hmm.
read that and see how Trump is doing. It's the same playbook, and it's horrifying to see that. And honestly, I was just like, this feels like real life, actually. And
Yeah.
it's terrifying. I mean, what they're doing is not, I mean, snatching people off the streets and killing them, or sending them to El Salvador, into these prisons and disappearing them. I mean, it's really a scary time. And I just keep hoping that the elections, the midterms, will create some sort of opportunity for rebirth or control, or just checks and balances in any way. But it's a really disturbing time, especially for people living with disabilities that are unverifiable. How do you get care? They're stripping care and rights of disabled people. So it's a really tough time.
His first round, he wanted to start monitoring our social media if you're taking disability to see if you're really disabled. Yeah, I don't know if you can tell by the notes, but my family came over in the first wave of Get Away from the Mustache Man, and they were very lucky they were actually allowed to come into this country, which I know that there's a lot of immigrants who were turned away and turned back towards
Yeah.
where this was all going down. So it's really kind of a horrifying thing to sort of like watch this all like
Yeah,
unfold in real time
absolutely.
and go, wow, should I be taking the lessons of my ancestors and packing right now? Or
Yeah.
do I stay and fight? Where would I even go? Like, and when we're disabled and we're hearing things like, well, if you don't love it, leave it. Well, first off, I love it. So no, I'm going to try to make it better. But the other thing is I don't think people realize that if you're disabled or older, getting to another country is not, you will not be allowed in. You can
Yeah.
visit, but you cannot stay if you're disabled. There are multiple
Yeah.
countries that will not let you get residency if you are disabled.
Including the United States.
And it's been really
People,
frustrating,
yeah, I mean, it is
especially when you pay
horrifying.
like $6,000 for healthcare and you're like, I can't
Yeah.
afford to do that. I'd like to live somewhere where, we don't have to roll the roulette dice on is it a heart attack or is it POTS?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a disturbing time. But part of the solution is amplifying people who do have expertise, and really performing that expertise in a way that, a lot of my friends who are college professors or scholars who do this like really deep, thoughtful work have no idea. They have no media training. They have no idea how to communicate with the
Yeah,
public. And that has to change. Like, if
it's a
we're going to
PR
be,
issue.
yeah, it is a PR issue. And so that's one of the things science politics is trying to do, is just try to be like, let's put your work into a format that people can access and engage with in a very deep way. And then if they like your work, they can go read the other stuff, you know. But just being having that exposure and expertise it's just so important. Even
Neil
stuff that can
deGrasse
be
Tyson talked
retweeted
about
or,
this.
you know, go ahead.
Yeah, Neil deGrasse Tyson had discussed this exact issue, and he's like,
Mhm.
"The reason I keep talking is because my poor lab partners would, like, shut down entirely when a camera would come in. I don't have that, so I would rush in and start talking," and that's how he became really famous. I'm not
Mhm.
gonna discuss the rest of Neil deGrasse Tyson because 'cause I'm still not okay about it, and I'm feeling very salty, but that one aspect I thought was really true,
Yeah.
and I think that when we're talking about politics, when we're talking about science, I think we need to understand that we are a cult of personality in this country, and we need better public relations. Like the
Yes.
Democrats have been horrible at messaging. I have never
So
seen a
bad.
group run from good PR. Like they'll know, they'll just know, and I'm like, they literally don't. Can you like
But
explain
that's
it?
a generational
And local people
issue.
are doing well, like Mom Donnie. He's doing great with the public messaging.
And also his mom makes films. Like he grew up in the industry. Like
He
that, I
did.
mean, honestly, we need that's and it's just a good demonstration of the need for a generational shift. And like
Mm,
yeah, I hear people put down students all the time or the younger generations and
love him.
I've been a professor for 13 years. I have to say the kids are all right. I love
They're
them. They
awesome.
are brilliant. I mean, I love being a mom. Like, I have a 12-year-old who just said, and a 9-year-old, and they say the most interesting things. And I'm like, I could never have thought about it that way. And I learn so much from them all the time. And when we don't take younger people seriously who are going to deal with this climate fiasco, it's just so narcissistic. It's like a deep generational narcissism that is cultivating so much unwellness for our all the species in this planet, this small planet. So how we think about the future, I think we need to really shift the responsibility and the power to a different direction into young people who can really talk about these issues in a deeply influential way. Yeah, I mean, I think the Dems are, if they do not make this shift, I mean, which you kind of thought in the last election that was the last time they would make this. Anyway,
Sorry. Sorry, I bring my heart right back down. I actually
yeah,
jumped. That's pretty funny. When I was talking about Nancy Pelosi, it's not that I think she's evil or bad. What I'm trying to say is that there is a generational issue of, and I'm not saying boomers are bad either. What I'm saying is that the worries of their generation are not the same worries or experiences of
absolutely.
this generation. So you really have to, and I will say that I cannot stand her stock trading. That's just not okay. Anyway, so this is not about this issue here. What the issue is that there is chronic illness that is so rampant. My mother had one friend who got sick. I don't have any friends who do not take an insane amount of pills. Like every single one of us have a chronic illness or cancer. It's just what's happening. And that's not something that my mom can understand because she didn't go through that. She didn't really understand the student loans because she didn't go through that. Like,
It's a capitalist problem, right? It's unregulated capitalism where there are no checks and balances. I mean, neoliberalism, I mean, let's just get all heady and weird here, but like
sure, let's
neoliberalism
do it.
and the lack of checks and balances in the 80s, and then Citizens United, wherever the floodgates were let open, and those kinds of stressors, the lack of a social safety net, the cultural transformation of idea privatization of all of these elements. I mean, pre 1980s, health was considered, maybe not in the United States, but around the world, health was considered a social good, literally a social good. In post 1980s, especially with structural adjustment programs and the World Bank and the influence of American medicine, health has transitioned to be a commodity all over the world. And especially the kind of power of US culture and our type of capitalism, and labor exceptionalism, I think, has created so much sickness. And if you combine that, the lack of security and expectation of us to be worker bees, on top of Citizens United and the stress of politics, of like trying to get our vote, and like all of the money that really floods us through ads and phone calls and text messages, and it's so stressful. I think that we don't have a way. I mean, so probably someone studied this, but it's very hard to see how we cannot be stressed by the constant barrage of messaging and lack of control that we have to do anything about it.
Just have like, if this is not your expertise and you're like, we can skip this part, but I'm just wondering if there's some aspect of, because we're talking about capitalism, and this is always an issue, right? Snake eating its tail, unchecked capitalism.
Mm,
Yet the idea of capitalism is to make more capital. But what they're doing is literally against that, because when you have an unhealthy population, you don't have workers, you are going to lose money. There was a study that was done on diabetes, and I'm gonna totally blank on where it was done, but there was a hospital that was spending, I think it was $3 million a year on unhoused people who had diabetes. And they're going into diabetic comas. There's all these issues because when you're unhoused, you can't keep insulin. So the hospital had a apartment building in their portfolio. They housed the people who were the most frequent flyers there and were having constant insulin issues. They put them in there and they saved so much money. It wasn't even close. Like they were
hmm
out of the red in months on this
Yeah.
apartment. So if we're looking at like this builds capital and
Yeah.
we're capitalists and we want the money, why are we turning away from the solutions that are compassionate but also are building wealth?
I think the corporations just have so much money. I mean, if we think about how we could reimagine healthcare in America, we have to think about equity. And so I don't
Mm,
think a single payer will ever pass in our government and in our culture. But if we think about the one of the best health system, and I know this gets a lot of bad rap, but like one of the things I argue with, so there's a wonderful physician, Elba Zola, she's a physician and does complex chronic illnesses, long COVID, and other stuff at Johns Hopkins. And she and I wrote this little piece that's really about like current long COVID clinics are switchboards. All they do is connect you to 20 different specialists that you could see because they're like, oh, you don't know how to get all the specialists you need. But if you are someone who has a fatigue related condition, you have dysautonomia, taking a shower could exhaust you. So going to 20 doctor visits is insane. It's not possible. It is not possible to do that. So reimagining healthcare is, reimagining going to a clinic and spending an hour or two and seeing everyone in one place who can try to get to the bottom of your health condition, right? Working together. And, when you think about what that is, I just did a conversation with someone who was talking about how she got to the bottom of her health condition, and she was in a military hospital at Walter Reed
mm.
and then was in VA. And if you think about that kind of healthcare, that is actually a great model. We have models that work. We know what works. We know when profit isn't at the center of a system, people do better. So reimagining how people can do better, we have existing models. We just have to fund them and prioritize them. And so, I mean, I think we can't really do anything without overturning Citizens United because of the power allotted to our political parties in that way.
For
Also,
we have an international audience. Would you like to explain really like in the most
oh, yeah,
way
sure.
what Citizen
Citizens
United was?
United was a court case that basically said you can spend all you want on political campaigns. So, because of that unregulated funding, we just have so much. I mean, I always think about like how much was spent on a campaign and like how many disability checks that could cover, or like how many people could get medical care and just get routinely seen by their clinician in a clinic that is near their house. I mean, we have a public school in basically every neighborhood or every region. What if we had like in the UK, they have a public school and then they have a general clinic where you can go and stop in anytime you don't feel well. It's not like a 3-month waiting list, but you can actually go and see a general practitioner anytime you're not well. And that provides, I mean, there's so many medical,
And you
models.
won't go bankrupt for going. What a
Yes,
shock.
exactly. Yeah. And so, how we imagine how profiteering off of health makes us so much sicker. It's just, I think Americans can't really wrap their head around what it looks like not to have profit at the center of medicine.
We've
And like
never
the
had.
UK, yeah, and no system's perfect. There's problems with every system around the world. But I think that we have a lot of evidence that ours is really bad.
I really deeply agree with you. I mean, just for our international audience, my last emergency room visit was $3,000 for the ambulance to go 2 miles with no medicine in it. I was charged $1,300 to walk through the door. I was charged $900 for every needle stick. She kept screwing up, so it was multiple $900 charges. $1,500 for a banana bag. The total ended up $16,000, of which I had to pay 6,000 of it. And that's just for a 3-hour visit. I was not admitted. I was only given banana bags. I was given a ultrasound and then I had to fight the insurance because I did not have an appendicitis. I had an ovarian cyst. Because I
Oh
did
my
not have an
God.
appendicitis, I was charged the whole amount. These are the things that happen here. Like, I needed to see a doctor because I've been throwing up for about 4 weeks. I could not get an appointment for another 4 weeks. So it's 2 months of nonstop vomiting. So like everything they tell us doesn't feel true, as they're like, in these places you wait months. I'm like, I waited 3 years for a doctor once. Like, this is not better here.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating to hear the people who are pre-disabled. And that's what I call healthy people, pre-disabled. You will join us, you will age into us. I will hold your
Hmm.
hand gently when I tell you you will be one of us. You'll have a bad day, or you're going to
Yeah.
get old enough to be one of us.
Yeah.
That dissonance is hard to get through,
Yeah.
to get them to
Absolutely.
understand, like, it's not a bootstrap situation. There is going to be
Right.
something that you cannot bootstrap through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's yeah, and I think that it's just really important to think about like what system do you live in, and when you're feeling well, what can you do to make it better? Because someday you're going to need it to be there for you. And I think that's what people don't understand until something happens. They lose their job, they get sick, they have a tragedy, it's really hard to
So how do
understand
we
until
make
you're there.
what do we do for like the researchers who are listening, the people who are like, I'm researching this thing, it's really important to me. It's mosquitoes. How do I make that sexy? How do I make mosquitoes sexy and people will listen to this? Like, what can we do to help? I'm in marketing was my world for a long time. I would be happy to help anyone. I do stuff with nonprofits all the time for free. I'm just bored. But advice can we give them? And what is the publishing aspect of something like this like?
Yeah.
How
Well, I
can
mean,
we
for
help researchers get their word out, basically?
Yeah, well, I mean, you can put them in touch with me for Science Politics.
Yeah.
We're trying to publish a lot, but I mean, and I mean, if you're actually offering to help get the word out in Science Politics, like really amplifying what we're doing, I think that communicating really good trusted information. Like Science Politics, we have, I was editor in chief for an Elsevier journal, loved it, helped start it, was so fun. But at the end of the day, I was sick of people have to pay $1,300 to publish work that they got money for, wrote up, and then wanted out there. Like that's bonkers. Science Politics is totally free, and we will help you write the right kind of piece. So people
Mm.
hold back because they don't know how to write for the public. Well, we will teach you. And, it's a lot. It's been a lot, but I'm really committed to it. And, as there's more interest in submissions, we'll keep on growing our team. But I think we can make a difference. And I think it's really kind of communicating in this really critical juncture in this space and getting scientists to speak up and speak out. So critical right now. I
How do people get
wish,
hold of
I
you?
wish. Well, I got off X for moral reasons when everything was happening in DC. All my friends were getting fired. And I am on Blue Sky. I think it's just um it's either I think it's just EM and then Mendenhall. And then I'm EA Mendo on Instagram, which is where I've been publishing a lot lately, but I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. And Science Politics also has a LinkedIn, Blue Sky, X account, Instagram. So we're actually publishing a lot of great stuff on Instagram. So check out Science Politics. I think it's
Okay,
just
so if you could send me all
science.politics.
those links,
I
then
will.
if you're listening to this, just head over to our website, invisiblenotbroken.com. It will all be right there. I will have just real clear links to be able to look at Science Politic. I'll also have links to the books so that you can take a look and read. And yeah, I cannot thank you enough for coming on. I'm so sorry if I was a little spacey today, but I really
You're
enjoyed spending
awesome.
time with you.
Well, thank you for your time too. It's been such a privilege.
Be kind, be gentle, and whatever it looks like to be fierce. This year we are putting out way more. It's me now, just me. Hi. So there's a lot more episodes coming out this year. I will sustain this as long as I can. All right.